Well, it's been almost exactly 2 years, and finally, the pandemic is dissipating. We made our choices, we learned our lessons, and it's a new dawn. And it's a new season for the year 2022, and a new time for all of us to embrace new life, new opportunities, new abundance. And while we balance our care and genuine prayer for peace and the awareness of a world that still includes unthinkable tragedy and sorrow and even war, we also are grateful for how blessed we are. And so let us use this spring of 2022 to take everything that we've learned, clear the past, and move forward in gratitude for the freedom that we have, for the blessings of our lives, for the opportunity to come together again in community, online, and yes, in person. We are all part of the awakening world, and we all have the roles that we're playing as individuals and collectively. We are the imaginal selves finding each other to create a beautiful, incredible butterfly out of the old paradigm. So welcome to spring of 2022. Welcome to the awakening world.
We come from the same source, a powerful love force. We're coming together, stronger than ever, not divided. We come from the same source, a powerful love force. We're coming together, hear the call, you are invited. We come from the same source, a powerful love force.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Katamas, and welcome to The Awakening World. I want to say a big hello to all of our friends coming into the Zoom room right now. And as always, let us know where you are geographically and what your thoughts are about this amazing topic: science, spirituality, and quantum consciousness. And I know a lot of you were watching last night's show. Wasn't it amazing? I mean, I got to say, last night's show was one of my favorite shows I've ever done. I was blown away with Adam and with Isaac, their wisdom. And this topic is such a powerful topic. And wait till you see who we have with us tonight. It's an amazing group of people. But just before I introduce Alan and JJ and Desiree and Stanley Krippner, who we're going to be with during this early show, I also want to welcome everybody who's watching on Facebook. Thank you to John and Summer Raymer for getting us out over 100 different Facebook groups and pages, and especially our friends at Unify. And for those of you who are watching on Unify, because that's our biggest broadcast partner, I will be periodically looking down at my other computer where I've got it tuned into Unify. So I'll be looking at your thoughts, your comments, and your questions. But for anybody watching on Facebook or on Alan's YouTube channel, the best bet is come on into the Zoom room. Come on in and join us. Really easy to do that. Just go to globalpeacetribe.com, globalpeacetribe.com, and register. It takes about a minute. And you'll then immediately get Zoom room links for all of our shows for the next 3 months. Because we do a show Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday morning. We'll have your email address, so you'll also get the replays. And if any of you didn't see last night's show, you're going to want to watch it because it was mind-blowing. And I think tonight's show is going to be pretty mind-blowing as well. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see friends from all over the world. Right away, I see a lot of our friends from Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, California, New Mexico, San Diego, Chico, California, Norfolk, Virginia, Santa Rosa, And then here on Unify, we've got people from Melbourne, Australia, Holland, Virgin Islands. So welcome, Minnesota, Malibu. From Malibu to Minnesota. That sounds like a line from a song. All right. We have had a really wonderful weekend because of Alan Steinfeld. I'm bringing Alan on right now. He and I, periodically, about once every 3 months, we do a show together now. And he's an amazing collaborating partner. And Alan, you hit the ball out of the park last night. I was so impressed with Zinka, Isaac, and Adam. And it was an amazing conversation. And same thing, you've got some remarkable people. So I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our guests for the early Zoom Room show.
Right. Thanks, Scott. And it's always great to collaborate because you've created such a great, fantastic forum that connects the dots around the world. And I think the reason last night's show was so on point is because people are needing new ideas to enter a new world. That's why we have some of the great researchers in the field of consciousness here today. So I just introduce, I guess I'll just introduce Stanley, JJ, and Desiree, but Stanley Krippner is going to really lead off the discussion about consciousness and science and his 15 plus years of investigation. Stanley Krippner is the foremost American parapsychologist. He doesn't want me to read the whole bio, but I will say in 2002 he won the APA Award for Distinguished Contributions to the International Advancement of Psychology. He has been around the world investigating phenomena. He's going to share some of that with us, and particularly with JJ and Desiree Hurtak, who I think he was going to be your best man at your wedding, wasn't he, JJ? and they're old friends, and they go back and they can trace the development of why we are at this place and this turning point in history now, where new ideas and new possibilities of what consciousness and science and that merging look like. So my good friends JJ and Desiree Hurtak are linguists, anthropologists, cosmologists, and JJ, please give us a little background about your relationship to Stanley, and just jump into, dialogue there.
Thank you so much. Well, we're very honored to honor our beloved colleague, Stan Krippner, of course, is one of the foremost thinkers in parapsychology, certainly one of the great catalysts who's worked behind the scenes with people like Dr. Rob Jan from Princeton University, Judy Scotch and her husband, Robert, who in the 1970s really were the pioneer thinkers, of course, and miracles. Thelma Moss at UCLA, I can go on and on, connecting with the indigenous in Brazil. Also a friend and a colleague of Elizabeth Rauscher, perhaps one of the most foremost parapsychologists and physicists of the world. Stan Krippner represents really the whole team of thinkers, what I would call evolutionary leaders who want to see a positive world. So it's on my honor to be a part of this panel, recognizing his contributions for over 50 years. And we're proud to say that he hasn't given up yet. He's going to turn the world around again and again, as he's done in the past. So our great love to you, Stan, for being a colleague, a friend, also a great futurist.
Mm-hmm. So Stanley, why don't you go into a little bit of how in your investigations you've merged the field of consciousness, awareness with scientific documentation, and you guys can dialogue about that. So Stanley, go ahead, give us a little background.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I have to correct you. I am not the foremost parapsychologist in the world. Absolutely not. I'm embarrassed to hear that. There are probably 24 at least more prominent parapsychologists than I am. Okay. Anyway, aside from that, I think that this is an important topic, and the thrust of my investigations has been a scientific one. In other words, using scientific methods to explore various fields that I've been involved in, such as parapsychology, but also hypnosis and psychedelics, meditation, also the whole field of consciousness is divided into many, many domains. There's a domain of cognition, a domain of emotion. All of those are of interest to me, and different of my publications focus in on different aspects of consciousness. So that would be my introduction to answer your very tantalizing question.
Desiree, go ahead.
Right. Well, I just want to mention that Stan has been around for a long time, and he's done all those things you just mentioned. One of the things that we connected with him is in 75. This was published from lectures in 1973. It's called Energies of Consciousness. It was from the famous publishing house, Gordon and Breach at that time. And in this book, it's very similar to your book, Alan, Making Contact, because it has various writers, one of which was Dr. Hurtak at the time. He was quite a young person writing about this. But also in there is Ed Mitchell, Thelma Moss, if you're familiar with her. She was an amazing person connected with UCLA. And also William Tiller, who worked at Stanford University. He was connected also with the consciousness dimensions. So it was an amazing book that Stan was able to put together with really top figures in this was published 1975. So we love Stan. Go ahead.
No, I just wonder, can you give us a little discoveries that Stan made, or some of the insights he made, or Stan can volunteer himself? Yeah.
Well, Stan, this was about your Carillion work, right? A lot of that was Carillion, and also some other research that was going on at the time in consciousness, because consciousness was just beginning to be a field of understanding. Everyone thought consciousness came just from inside the brain. They didn't think there was any interconnectedness or any even emanation. So Carillion, when you could see something that's like shooting out of your fingers after you've meditated versus before you meditated, you start realizing the body is an electric field and that there's something in the consciousness that shifts that. Stan, can you talk about that, a little bit about the Carillion and consciousness?
Actually, I'll be happy to talk about it, but it's really something that I did decades ago. It's not really current. And Carillion photography was a type of exercise where people would put their finger, a coin, a leaf, whatever, on a piece of film, and electric charge was run through it. It's called Carillion because it was developed by Semyon Carillion in the former Soviet Union. Now, what came out of all of this? Nothing really substantial. You look at the results of Carillion photography, and I've said then and I say now, it's best appreciated as an art form. You get some beautiful photographs from Carillion photography, and the people who I respect most in that field are people like Don Parker, Jean Millay, who used Carillion photography to create gorgeous works of art. And Jean Millay actually did a quilt with the Carillion pictures in it. So this is basically an art form rather than anything that I would consider strictly scientific.
But Stan, don't you think though, if you were meditating and things shot out more from your fingers, or that showed you a little bit difference, between one state of consciousness and another? Or what are you into right now? What's intriguing you right now?
You're not sure. Somebody might have just pressed their finger more firmly on the film.
Okay.
And that doesn't require a change of consciousness. So the example you give, I'm sorry, just doesn't hold up.
Okay.
What about the fact that maybe light is emanating from the human body? JJ's had experiences like that. JJ, you want to comment about light and bodies?
There have been significant studies that Konstantin Karakov and others in Russia have done on what is called the biophotonic experience, whereby higher states of consciousness, or those areas where one sublimates energy on high levels of peak experiences, can allow certain energy releases that show themselves in a variety of forms or geometries 3 or 4 inches off the body. This has been studied by Marco Bishop in Germany and Switzerland and a whole bunch of others. But Stan, you're the great synthesizer. And again, I don't want to overstate your role in one discipline because you have brought many disciplines together. And I want to add at this point, you introduced me to a guy by the name of Erickson, Reed Erickson, who in turn helped with our research in Tibet and Oriental studies to save Tibetan documents on medical astrology, astronomy. And this was a whole area of medical science that was overlooked by Western doctors. The Tibetan documents went back 800 to 1,000 years and provided, as it were, a medical recipe adjacent really to what the Chinese, later the Japanese, were doing in terms of the acupuncture field of science. And I salute you for opening the door really to serious work with the Tibetan community, both in Tibet as well as in exile.
But a lot of this was past. So Stanley, what's your interest now? What have you learned over these literally 50 years practically of research?
Well, you're getting a little bit ahead of me. I want to comment on what Jim just said about the light coming from the human body. Yes, this is true. These are biophotons that come out of the human body. They can be measured. Franz Popp in Germany has been the leading researcher on this. And there is a whole body of research in scientific journals about biophotons and the human body. That's something that is not a particular discipline of mine, but I'm interested in it. Now, to skip ahead in terms of what I am doing now, frankly, I have finished doing my research. Right now, I'm working for my publisher on my memoirs. And on my memoirs, I hope that I live long enough to finish them. I'll be pulling together everything that I've done over the past several decades. And as I'm a little bit further along, I'll be able to answer your question more specifically. But just to give you an example, I am writing about the work with dream telepathy that we did, that I worked on for 10 years at Maimonides Medical Center in New York City. And this was published in over 100 articles over the course of the years, in not only in parapsychological journals, but in mainstream medical and psychological journals, still controversial, but at least the body of research is there. However, I was not just satisfied with getting the results from our dream telepathy studies. I wanted to find out how this would be linked with something that's more measurable. And so what we did was to note the geomagnetic field for each of our experiments. And when the geomagnetic field was low, there was more telepathy. When it was high, there was less telepathy. Now, this is something where there is a correlation between something ephemeral like telepathy and something solid like geomagnetic fields. And so this, I would say, is one of my key interests and the thrusts of many of my investigations.
And that's great because we work with the Russian researchers who have put these people in almost like a type of semi-Faraday cage where they played with the magnetic fields affecting the brain. And they have agreed 100% with what you said. You lower the magnetic field strength, you call it geomagnetic, but basically the magnetic field strength, and you seem to open up, we'll say, to a higher consciousness. I think that that's actually happening right now on the planet. I think because like you have the South Atlantic anomaly over South America coming from Southern Africa. And I think the people are starting to get more consciously aware amongst one another. And of course, the whole field strength all over the planet, for the most part, is shifting. And scientists are even concerned that it will actually reverse the magnetic poles at one point. But for the now, it's just reducing. So that's saying we're opening a new era of consciousness for all of us. I hope you agree with that.
Let us hope. It couldn't come a day too soon.
Hey, Stan, can you talk a little bit about what dream telepathy means? Give us an example of that. And JJ can also talk about non-local consciousness. But go ahead, tell us, Stan, what those experiments were.
Well, back 50 years ago, when we first got this work started, there were a number of anecdotal reports of psychotherapists working with their clients, and they would have a dream about the client's personal problems. Once in a while, the client would have a dream about the psychotherapist's life. Well, this was all anecdotal, and anecdotes don't stand up on their own, but they can lead toward more controlled research. So Montague Ullman, who I worked with at Maimonides Medical Center in New York City, set up a laboratory where we had a sleeping participant trying to dream about what somebody in a distant room was looking at, usually an art print of some sort or another. And over the course of our work, which took about 10 years, we did some 50 different experiments and tabulated them up. And not only did we find correlations between the dreams and what the center was looking at, but we found out that, as I said before, this was most successful when there was low geomagnetic activity. Now, all of this is discussed in our book, Dream Telepathy. All of this is discussed in dozens of articles, not only from our point of view, but several other people have also replicated this. Now, the outrageous skeptics are saying, no, this has not been replicated. You go to Wikipedia, they say it's not been replicated. Not true, not true at all. Wikipedia, you cannot trust when it comes to anything along these lines, by the way. We had 3 different laboratories report and repeat what we did at Maimonides, and all of that is in the literature, all of that is written up, and it's easy to track down. Let me just give you an example for the listeners who are not really able to grasp the subtleties of this. One night, somebody was looking at a picture, and it was a picture of a boxing match, a painting called Both Members of the Club by Bellow. Now, the dreamer had a dream about going into Madison Square Garden, and he saw a poster. The poster showed a boxing match, and he was going to buy pictures of the boxing match. And the dreamer wasn't even interested in boxing. So here's a case where the dream matched the picture. I hope that's clear to everybody. Now imagine us doing that dozens and dozens of times over the course of 10 years, and you have a body of literature that can be examined, looked at, and learned from.
Thank you. JJ, please talk about now. Yeah.
I wanted to say that Stan was also a leader in the study of psychotropic medicine, particularly from working with people in South America. I know my late colleague, Elizabeth Rauscher, who did this magnificent book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time with Us, spoke highly of Stan's ability to work across cultural frontiers and particularly look at the ethnic and the indigenous traditions in terms of what they had to offer, both in terms of the medical use of sacred plants, but also the ability that they could reach higher states of consciousness through shamanistic principles through which they could be, shall we say, experiencing non-local realities. And he was able, that is to say, Stan here was able to outline the importance of this long before Western scholars and scientists were involved.
Can you talk about non-local consciousness as a scientist, JJ Hurtak?
Well, this has been the real work behind the scenes at Stanford Research Institute that spent 20 years, over $20 million, looking at Mission Impossible, namely, can the human psyche leave its three-dimensional horizon and entertain or experience other states of awareness and bring back information that can be factually verified by a third-party source. And the upshot of all of this was, yes, the SRI studies on non-local consciousness were validated. And in our studies of over 700 pages, over 300 scientific papers, it's clear that The second greatest contribution in the 20th century, besides splitting the atom, was realizing that the human being is local and non-local. And consciousness, capital C, is not simply confined to space and time or sodium ions flowing through our veins, but consciousness is all space, capital A, double L, which means consciousness exists theoretically even before the Big Bang. Consciousness is that which contains all elements of evolution and provides the inventive frontiers of how we interrelate and contact all life within all possibilities of life.
But I think also what Stanley was describing about the dream experiences is part of that, because what's interesting is that it shows even when we're unconscious, so to speak, or in the dream state, you would say subconscious, you're able to project, you're sending and you're receiving information all the time. And if you tune into that, you're able also to pick up on it. And so I think that was a great experiment. Maimonides Hospital is a fabulous, really kind of real place that scientists and doctors work at. So it's not some woo-woo institute. And he was able to really make a difference with the scientific community through showing his dream experiments.
And I wanted to say this on behalf of Stan. He may not know the full story of our work in Tibet behind the scenes in the early 1970s, but we were able to microfilm a lot of Tibetan medical documents and save them from destruction during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So there's a whole facet of Oriental intellectual history, particularly in the region of Eastern and Southern Tibet, that was saved for posterity. And we look at now the medicine of the East with the medicine of the West converging in this age of synthesis.
Right. I just want to get some final words here from Stanley as we wrap up this portion of the show. Stanley, do you have anything you would like to just share about your years of research and wisdom and knowledge?
Yes, I would say that maybe to wrap things up, there are a lot of stories out there, a lot of anecdotes out there, which of course are important, and I've made collections of them. But what has motivated me is to try to pin down these experiences and put them into some sort of scientific framework, and then get them published, get them out into the world in scientific journals and websites and podcasts and the like, so that you have a robust body of evidence that will sort of withstand some of the irrational criticisms that we get over the years. Now, Jim was extremely perceptive in terms of some of his knowledge about Eastern medicine and how it has now come into a larger picture and is enriching Western medicine, but also in terms of the psychotropic experiences in South America. And it is true that I was one of the first to learn about ayahuasca, or yahe, as it's called in some parts of Brazil, and to do some actual research with it. It was very, very simple research, but I was the first one to collect a couple of dozen of experiences that ayahuasca users had, and I was able to use a scale that we devised detecting spiritual elements in experiential reports. And we found spiritual elements in the ayahuasca experience, got that published in a journal, and much to my happiness, this is the first scientific study done with ayahuasca. Now, it is true that these were anecdotal reports, but the use that we put to these anecdotal reports was to take a scale and detect spiritual elements in some or all of them. So I think that would be a good wrap up for you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you with us, Mr. Krippner. And of course, JJ and Desiree, you guys are amazing. And luckily, everybody, stick around because we have a lot of JJ and Desiree coming up. I believe that Mr. Krippner is going to be working with his biographer. If you get a chance to come on back into our roundtable conversation, we'll continue that. But this was a great, great start. And already people